speak at a church. So I'm not a priest, and this is definitely more pressure than my normal presentation. And it's something I'm obviously not an expert at. I love that there's some lifelines here. I can go to some definite people that are very, very holy and pray a lot, and I know a lot about the church and so on, but I'll do the best I can. I'm really a student, so I love seeing the students here. I'm just a student on this topic. A while back, back when Kathy and McKenna had run Family Faith, there were more speakers, and I really like that sitting here as an adult, because I think we're always learning. So I'm just here to kind of keep that tradition going, and I'm honored that Michelle and Rick actually allowed me to do this. So miracles, one of the other things I would say is this topic, quick raise of hands. I'm not going to do this a lot. I hate that when speakers do that, but do you hear miracles on the news? Do people talk about it? Raise your hand if you hear that. You do? All right. A lot of times I don't, so I'm honored that you guys do. I feel like there's not enough people talking about all the wonders that we experience. And I'm going to go to this slide, and there's a reason why. I think the most famous miracle that I've ever heard on TV is like perfect timing right now, the Olympics. And Al Michaels always talks about this. It's probably the most iconic broadcasting ever known to man, at least in the United States. Probably not in Russia. He said like the time was running out, and for the young kids, the Soviet Unions, they were beasts, and they just beaten them up in a preliminary game, and there was really no chance the United States could win this game, and they did, and they won it. And Al Michaels was so scared they were going to score one more goal, Soviets to score it at the very last. So he couldn't do all that hype about what a wonderful game it was. And he was going to say this is miraculous, and then just the words came out, do you believe in miracles? And he shouted, yes. Well, I'm here to kind of tell you this actually isn't a miracle. This was just a wonderful, wonderful experience by underdogs that it was incredible, right? And the reason being is, I don't know if you guys can read these slides, so it's so far back, but this is referred to as a miracle. That's probably the most famous miracle that people know that don't go to church. Miracle on ice, and if you look at the definition of miracle, and you go into, ask Alexa, you don't even have to pull up the dictionary anymore, if you go to Google, or if you go anywhere, there's really no mention of God, and a lot of times it says, in a very amazing or unusual event. It's kind of the second meaning of miracle, but I would go to tell you that there's more to it, and I hope, if you're in church, you're probably ready to get it. So I'm not going to talk about that definition of miracles. Really going to stick with the first one, so I'll get rid of the second one. An unusual or wonderful event that is believed to be the cause of the power of God. And if you look at the definitions and go to different dictionaries, they're taking out the word God. So it's supernatural or, different things. I'm trying to think what else there, like a divine power or something like that. And so I hope that we always remember that God is really the heart of a true miracle. That whatever definition you come up with, I hope that that's what you believe too. And as we go through this, hopefully I'll have some stories that you'll believe that too if we're going already. So I want to start with the wedding of Cana. I didn't know where to start. There's a lot of pressure. Father Jack's there. You can actually be doing a way better probably presentation on miracles. So I went to the Bible, right? Like I'll start there, and actually got. If anybody wants to kind of do the same journey that I did, the New Testament started there, and this is Matthew Kelly. It's kind of a lot of great books, and I just, if you want, I got Exodus. I just started to put a little M in the margin, and I couldn't believe it. Like we hear them every Sunday when we come here, but I couldn't believe how many miracles that Jesus performed, and it was really, really amazing. So I don't know where I was going to go with this, but this was the first one. And you know what? I don't want to offend anybody, but I remember this when I was growing up, like, oh man, that's the miracle that Jesus, if you're not familiar with this miracle, Jesus turned water into wine. And I remember thinking, wow, like that's, when I was in college, that's the guy who won at the keg party, the keg runs out. And I don't mean to belittle the miracle, but I didn't have the value in this miracle that I should have. And I over the last few years, I'll get into some experiences, but then this has completely had a new meaning to me. I'm going to go back to this miracle in a minute. But as I did this journey, I just started to write down this little notes in the Bible, I started to kind of group these. I'm like trying to figure out where am I going to go with this presentation. So in the beginning, water the wine, we just talked about that one, but everyone's probably familiar with how he turned just a few fish and bread and performed miracles to feed people, walked on water, a whole bunch of great things. Then there's, again, hopefully you guys are familiar with different types of miracles, but there's miracles about healings. And so, a lot of different, the blind, people that were paralyzed, crippled, deaf, and even brought people back to life like Lazarus. Then the third kind of miracle was like the demons or different things where people were possessed. Some of them might have been that they had something like epilepsy and they didn't know how to describe it back then, but there are other times where there was definitely occurrences where there were demons and Satan and the powers of that side were involved. And so I tried to group these things, and so the first one was really around like Jesus' power over nature. The second one, the grouping I put in there was really the power over, like healing people that were suffering in some different way. And the third one was about exorcisms. And so I was like, all right, now what am I going to do? There's more miracles, and I didn't put them all up there. We couldn't fit them all in the circles, but what are we going to do now? And I was trying to figure out what's that common thread that links all of these together. And I went to this. And if you're someone that prays the Rosary, and if you're not, I hopefully, Father talked about praying today, and I really believe that in the power of prayer, you'll get that as I go through this presentation. But if you pray the Rosary, in the very beginning, you say the first 3 Hail Marys, and the first one is for an increase in faith, an increase in hope, the second one, and the third one is an increase in charity. And charity, to me, is synonymous in some ways with love. When I think of charity, I kind of think of writing a check to a charity. So love, I think, is even more encompassing, so that's why I picked that word. But if you're thinking about what those mean, the faith part, either people had faith that Jesus could heal them, or the way that he impacted their lives, they then had faith. The hope part was, they hoped that they could be cured of their issue or whatever it might be, but then they had a larger hope in salvation and who he was and what he came to do. And then love, the last part, God sent his only son here to die for us. And there's really no better definition of love than that. And so you'll see that at the core of almost every miracle that you read about, that love is involved in some way. So just a couple examples of how that really works. There's multiple cases of Jesus healing the blind. And the first one that I'm showing here, Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight and faith, you are healed." And that meant a lot to that man, obviously. And I always kind of wish there were more words in the Bible and you could read more about Jesus' life, but also you could read about what happened to these people that were healed and how did they transform and how did they become different people and maybe better people. And like a father said today, how did that grace work through not just that one person, but impact a whole bunch of other people? The other one, so that was kind of the healing of the person. Remember I said there was kind of the supernatural one too. I don't know if you recall the story of Peter, the really stormy sea, and he sees Jesus walking on the water, and he gets out and he believes that he can walk on the water, and then he kind of gets frightened and he sinks. And Jesus says at the end, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And that's why he sank. And I really believe that this miracle tells you a lot. I've heard probably Father Jack and other people say that this is like our life. Like we believe that if we focus on Jesus, we'll be better. But if we kind of look at the distractions of the world, we kind of lose our faith and we sink. So that miracle tells a lot. Another healing of a blind person when Jesus picked the clay up from the ground and rubbed it in the blind man's eyes. Before he did that miracle, he said, "While I am the Lord, I am the light of the world." And that really went to that he's our hope. And so that's why I put that example in. And then he constantly showed that he loved people. So there's so many miracles that I can use as examples. So I didn't do that. I actually brought in a quote from back then Pope John Paul II, but now St. John Paul. And he spoke about miracles. If you read just in the red, They also reveal God's love for humanity, particularly for those who suffer, who are in need, who implore healing, pardon, and compassion. And wow, like what a just clear way, better way that I could explain how Jesus loved us. So that was kind of the journey I went through, all what Jesus had done, but I also kind of wanted to bring in some things that are modern day and what we some of us don't hear about, because again, the news isn't bragging about miracles. A lot of you can raise your hand. This was my wife back when we were having our baby, and our first baby, and I was out playing poker with my friends, and not a good poker player, so the miracle might have been that I was getting called home, but I got a call, and my wife was crying so hard I could not understand what she was saying. I could not make it out. I tried to calm her down, could not calm her down, and all of a sudden she said, "The baby." That's all I need to hear. I said, "Guys, I said I'll be right home." I pushed all the money on the table, said, "It's all yours. I'm gone." And it looks like it's being recorded, so I won't admit that I might have broken some rules getting home that night and broken some laws, flying home as fast as I possibly could. And I found out that she had a lot of blood, and she said she lost the baby. So that night I remember calming her down. We'll go to the doctor tomorrow, and I laid her on the bed, and I laid next to her. I remember praying the whole night. I can still remember my left hand being on her belly and praying the whole night. We went the next day to the hospital. For those that don't know what an ultrasound looks like, that's why I put this picture in, but we weren't, people weren't smiling like those two were smiling. And, but I still was holding her hand, and I had faith, and I was praying for her. And I still remember it wasn't like an urgent prayer. There was kind of a calm and faith to it that I can't explain, but I just said, whatever comes our way, I know God's going to take care of us, and we'll be okay. And so we kept praying and praying. The lady, if you don't know what this procedure is like, you put a little gelatin on the stomach, and it just goes around and around, and it finds the baby, the little wand or whatever you call it. And this lady went around and around and around and around, and then around and around, and nothing showed up. Finally, that smile, it wasn't a smile, but that concern went to a really bad facial expression. And she left. And I remember still praying and praying, and just holding my wife's hand, and all of a sudden, someone came in, and another person came in, another person came in, and they kept trying. And I remember this time praying so intensely with my hand in my head facing the ground, holding my wife's hand. And one lady said, "There she is." And I heard, there the baby is. And I still to this day remember the feeling of joy that went through my body. And that later on, Catherine was born. If you see her at church, that's who she is. And I know, people might say, well, that's a pretty special story, but how can we explain? Bleeding's probably normally part of a pregnancy. It can happen. An ultrasound's not perfect. You can't always find the heartbeat and all that. But I love this quote. Albert Einstein said, "Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous." And if you kind of try to go the scientific route on so many miracles, most of them you can probably try to disprove. But you're trying to just basically hide that God was involved. And so that was a picture of our little baby, and that was probably my most important miracle that happened in my life. She's probably embarrassed after this. But that one, I think, is a little bit more easy to prove that it's maybe not a miracle. This story, I won't still tell you the end, but this was a parishioners that had a difficult pregnancy. And at the old family faith sessions, you might have heard this presenter, but if you didn't, I'm putting this back in. The person said, they basically went into Boston, the mom, and said this, they're having a hard time. I'm trying to not mess up the story, but the doctor was going to give that mother really bad news. Like, this baby is not compatible with life, incompatible with life. What a horrible thing to hear. And they strongly advised, I won't get into what they said, but they basically said the baby's not going to live, we need to end the baby's life. And how hard could that be to hear? And they had evidence. The baby had stopped growing, it wasn't growing. If you look at that ultrasound, you can see the chin is not fully developed, and other issues were arising, and so they said, I hope I'm not messing this up, but if you want to have some time with this baby, we need to do this baby. So they asked for some time, and they waited till Monday, a couple days later. The birth was scheduled for the morning. For some reason, it got postponed to the afternoon. They were in a normal hospital room. They were in an area where they actually just sent in a post-mortem photographer to take a picture of the baby after it died, so they had a memory of the baby. It was a really bad scene, if you can imagine. The Eucharistic minister was there to perform a baptism, and then it was scheduled. So the baby eventually came out of the mom, and the mom had that Eucharistic minister there, and she couldn't really tell what was going on, and the Eucharistic minister came over with a mask and was just crying. And so she thought, I lost the baby. And then the Eucharistic minister pulled the mask down and said, basically a miracle, your baby is alive and doing well. And so what had happened was, in a short period of time, they went from this incompatible life and praying over the weekend to, we've all got to see this beautiful smile at church. Joe and Sylvia and Kathy and Jason were the ones that had this beautiful baby. And I hope I didn't mess up any of the details, but I believe in 2 days the baby went from projected by measurements and all the professionals saying that it was about 3 pounds and 12 ounces, and proof that the baby wasn't fully developed, to the baby being much healthier and being able to live, still had some complications, but had also gained 2 pounds, 5 pounds, 12 ounces. To me, that is an even much more obvious example of a miracle. And the thing is, there are so many miracles that we don't know about because people don't talk about them, or we don't talk about it. So I'm just happy to present a story like that. I also really want to nail home at this point that this isn't luck. Like, hey, we're just lucky that this happened. Like, there is much more involved, and especially when prayer is involved. If you remember, we talked about 2 stories of birth, but if you read the front of the book that's in front of you, for us men, and for our salvation, he came down from heaven, and by the Holy Spirit was incarnate of the Virgin Mary and became man. That's really the first miracle that should be in Jesus' life. And so I can't hammer home enough of just how blessed we are and not lucky. Speaking of blessings, I had the opportunity to go on the Haiti mission trip with Haiti 180, with a whole big group that regularly goes from our church. Fantastic experience. And before that, there's a whole backstory, but someone had given me a very special crucifix. And it was for me, but he had also said, I wish I could have someone to give this to Haiti, and to bring it to Haiti and give it to someone in Haiti. And he was going to make another one. One thing led to another. I just brought mine. We're only allowed to bring 20 pounds because we had to take a helicopter once. Long story, this is the only thing that I could really bring as a gift. And I brought it, and I didn't know who I was going to give it to, but we went on this, not excursion, but we went up into the mountains, and we got to meet some of the local Haitians. And this girl was in a chair, had no strength in her legs. You can see how thin her arm was. She couldn't walk. And so we're coming from probably the richest, most blessed country in the world, and we're going to pray for this young girl, and she's praying for us instead. She sang a prayer in such a wonderful, I couldn't understand what she was saying, but we had Emmanuel here on the right. He kind of heads up the boots on the ground for Haiti 180 and the mission of the orphanage, the elderly homes, and the school. And so he actually was translating this beautiful prayer that she was saying. So, I don't know, I didn't want to feel like we're a bunch of tourists even there on the cross, so we did. Everybody walked away, but I tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, would you ever translate this and explain how important this cross was, and I was going to pray for a miracle for him. And we had a moment, we talked, and he said that was very nice of me to do. And we walked off, and we went to visit other people in this village that are literally living in places that are worse than our sheds in our back of our house. If you have a shed, like they're just not sturdy, etc. So we flash forward about an hour, we're leaving another one of these houses in another visit, And this man, Manny, says, "See that lady in the orange?" I said, "Yeah," or a young girl, like he said. He goes, "God asked the farmer named Samuel to pray over her, and he did. And the next day she could walk." And so it was really impactful for me because Mary and Jesus and God are even in places that, they're probably in places that they are needed more than anywhere else in the world. And that one really came through for me. I'll go back to that in a second. But Father Cully, I had the joys of golfing with him in the golf tournament this year. And so I don't see him in the crowd, but he would be mad that I brought up him golfing, so I won't do that. But we had a really good opportunity to get to know each other. And September, I think was when the golf tournament was, and I said, "Oh man, in February I have to do this presentation. What am I going to talk about?" He said, "Well, I know a story. I had a person that actually was working in Haiti, a doctor, and he had some equipment, and he wanted to test it. It was kind of old, didn't know if it would work for the mission that he was going down for, and so he just tested it on his son. The EKG, I think it's EKG, where you test your heart and all that stuff, found that son, if he hadn't had that test, probably would have died. He had a heart condition that needed immediate surgery. And it's one of those things, again, is it just a coincidence that this man does great work, goes to Haiti, helping, and just the fact that he just tested on his son, he could have tested on 1,000 other people, right? So to me, that was a really inspiring story. I don't know if you know Robert Mayo, it's not on his shirt, but we were in Haiti, we were building a big hole for their cemetery. It was really, really hot, so I hope he doesn't hate that I put that picture up there. That's one picture I had of him, but he came up to me after I shared that story about how that girl in the orange t-shirt was healed. And he said, "I feel comfortable telling you this." He doesn't tell a lot of people, so I'm honored that he's letting me share this in the presentation. But he went to Magic Glory, and he was in a low part of his life, went to the Christmas Eve Mass, and he was not sure what he was going to experience there. And he was walking around the grounds. I think it's St. James Church. I've never been there. And he said, a little baby said, "Look, it's Our Lady, it's Our Lady." And he said he looked up on the hill, and there was Mary, and he saw her, and she was shimmering in gold, kind of like diamond, like sparkling. And he said when he would look away, he was kind of drawn back to her, and he could see her. And that, to me, was astounding. I instantly believed him. Easily for people not to believe, "Oh, you're crazy, you don't know what you saw." But I did believe him, and he actually was the one that gave me this rosary from them. So back to that first miracle that I was talking about, and I kind of joked about what it meant. But I think it's really, really important to remember what was said in the Bible about that miracle. Jesus wasn't ready. He said, "My hour has not yet come." But his mom really knew that he probably was ready, and said to the people, other human beings, "Do whatever he tells you." And that's when the miracle happened. And so it goes really the key to this miracle and why it's so important is those two in the middle and the relationship that they have. And how Mary also wants to help us and has an unbelievable amount of love for us. So that, in many, from the younger kids, would be described as Mary's, her intercession, how she helps us. It's why we pray to Mary. On a side note, if you're not praying the rosary, it's not just going to be prayed as a tool to create miracles, but a lot of wonderful things that can come out of it. So I encourage you. It only takes 15 to 20 minutes. If you're not comfortable and you want to learn how to do it, I just started doing it again a couple of years ago. I don't know if I ever really did it as a high schooler. I probably did it once or twice, but then I regularly do it now. There's a group that meets every Monday. I'll be there Monday if you want to go. And you can do it. I'm pointing over there because in the cold, I think that when the church is cold, they do it in the hall. Otherwise, they do it here. But also daily mass. If you can sneak out, daily mass is at 9 here, but at 8:30 every day, the rosary is being prayed. So something to consider. But the power of Mary, why Mary? Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is God had how many human beings to choose from to have that baby, and he picked her. And the first whole part of that prayer is about Mary and how wonderful she is, and the second part is about us asking for help. And so I would consider you to obviously pray to Jesus and God, but also pray to Mary and think about how you can help her help other people. A good example of Mary's intercession is about, I don't know if this was actually what it looked like, but there was a grandmother that came to the Rosary Group a couple decades ago. Maybe it was 2004. And so she said, my granddaughter's face has been crushed by a grate off the back of a landscaping truck. And I really, really need you, the group, to pray for her. And so the group, of course, prayed for her. If you're not familiar with the Rosary Group, amazing people. And they have a book, and this is the picture of the current book. But there's been many books they filled up, but they have to start new books. But imagine that's what the book looked like back in the day. So this is a Monday night. That week, the Rosary Group prayed for that girl. You can imagine just the damage that happened to her face. And they brought her in. They go to do the regular x-ray that they would do before a big surgery like that. And the surgeon walked out and said, we don't need to do the procedure. Her face is totally naked. And Rita told me the story, and she said it wasn't. They didn't know. The Rosary Group didn't know for about a year or so until they bumped from the grandmother and said, "How did the baby do? Or how did the girl do?" And they told her about the miracle. And at that moment, I think it was very, very clear to those grandparents how powerful prayer was and how powerful it was that helped create that miracle. And it was easy to link the two. A bigger one to consider, if you don't know about Fatima, I'm still kind of, again, learning on this journey, so someone else could stand up, I'm sure, and tell you way more things about Fatima. But in 1916, 3 shepherds' kids or farmers' kids were first approached, or a guardian angel came to talk to them to prepare them for seeing Mary. And Mary came, she came 6 times every month on the same day. And what is so interesting of this, basically the 2 kids on the right were later canonized. They became saints. They died at a younger age. And then this lady on the left, Sister Lucia, she became someone that talked with the popes because she had visions and was able to relay very important things from Mary to the religious leaders at the time. The interesting thing about this was the kids, when they first saw her, I think it was May 13th, and they were asked to pray the rosary every day to stop the world war that was going on. And what an unbelievable amount of pressure just by me to have to do that, right? And so they did that, and they continued to have resistance. And I don't have time to tell you the whole story, but on the last day that Mary came to see them in May, 100,000 people, give or take, came to witness what they were seeing. And unfortunately, none of them could see Mary when Mary did come to talk with the kids. But they all saw the sky. The sun danced and zigzagged. So it was a miracle of the sun, or a miracle of Fatima. And it was proof just that many people could see a miracle happen is really awe-inspiring. So how did Fatima, Father talked today about how the grace of God works through people, and then it spreads, right? So how did that go on to help others? A very extreme example is, we're not always good people. World War II eventually happened, and they talk about necessary evils, and this is probably the biggest definition of it, but whether you agree with it or not, the Hiroshima bomb was dropped to eventually stop the war. And if you can imagine the destruction that would cause, 80,000 people died, and then the radiation was so bad, a whole bunch of other people died after that. The bomb, when it came down, just devastated everything. Just buildings wrecked in miles and miles and miles, right? Nothing is left standing. But this is a picture of I believe Our Lady of Assumption Church after, it was in the very close range where the bomb went off. It's pretty much intact. And the interesting thing was, there were Jesuit priests in the rectory that survived. Like it's just basically, scientists are baffled. It was like physically impossible for these people to live. The other thing was all the doctors and the people, experts, were so concerned about them that they basically said, you're going to die soon. You get radiation poisoning, you're going to get lesions all over your skin, and you're going to die. Not one of them died from that. They all lived a full life. I put some words in here. They never doubted that they had been blessed with the protection of God by the Blessed Virgin Mary. The quote was, "We are living the message of Fatima, and we pray the Rosary every day." That's how they explained how they lived. Basically like a force field. They had minor injuries, like glass and some bruising and other things. Just an unbelievable miracle. And I don't know if you can see, but my guess is this picture was taken after this happened, and you can see that it looks like the priests are on their knees praying right outside the church. Pope John Paul, now again St. John Paul, I don't know if you know, had an assassination attempt on his life. There's some younger people in the audience, some older people will probably remember that the day it happened. And he was in the hospital for 3 months because of how devastating that injury was. For his whole life after that, he basically thanked Mary. He believed strongly in Mary, that she basically moved that bullet trajectory just a little bit so it wouldn't hit a major organ or an artery or something that basically saved his life. And if you look at the date of that shooting, that assassination attempt, 64 years to the exact date of Mary's first visit to those kids in Fatima. So this is a picture of him at Fatima, Portugal, I believe. And so the real interesting thing was there was a statue of Mary there, had beautiful crown jewels on her head, and there was one spot open, and it just happened to fit the bullet that was in his body that he placed on her. So Fatima, there's been many, many examples of how Fatima has produced healings and miracles and such. I talked a little bit about Robert before with Magic Glory. So this is an interesting one that, again, I tried to tell some stories on a grander scale, but I want to bring it back to our community and our church. There are people that go there all the time, and they want to be healed, and they are. We have somebody